Chapter 29, Full Moon. "You're probably going to need a lot of wood," Stu said as he dropped yet another armload into the cabin. "It seems like a lot," Sam replied, looking at the stack almost as tall as him. Stu nodded with his hands on his hips. Sam was more than happy with the woodpile, but wondered if Letha and John would soon be arriving. He watched as Stu fiddled with a piece of birch in his hand. Stu slowly peeled the bark off, then tossed each long strip into the fire to watch it flame. The raven swooped in from outside and perched at the foot of the bed. It eyed both the boys. "Caw." I know," Stu rolled his eyes. He scratched the pelt, then gave Sam a slap on the back. "Good luck tonight." "Thanks." Sam didn't know if he felt excited or nervous, or both. "Come on, Raven," Stu said. Sam watched him walk the path away from the cabin under the ombre sky as the orange faded to blue. Where are Letha and John? Sam wondered. His stomach growled. He hadn't eaten since Mabel's in the morning and was feeling particularly famished. He had grown used to Letha or John bringing a bit to eat when they stopped by at the end of each day. Sleeping was always easier on a full stomach. The wind shifted and swirled snow from the roof down and around him. It'll even be colder tonight, Sam thought. Maybe one more load. He went to the woodpile and loaded his arms. Sam dropped a load of wood next to the stove and kicked off his boots. When he opened the tin of tea from Constance, all there was inside was a single dried maple leaf. The door closed and the timber slammed into place. "John? Letha?" Sam called out, but there was no answer. He gave the door a shove, but as always, it wouldn't budge. "John?" he called out louder. Silence. So this is proving night. The pelt came and wrapped around Sam's shoulders. Sam immediately felt more calm. "I thought there'd be a test or something. Maybe more logs with Amasa," Sam said to the pelt. He sighed. After adding a couple pieces of wood to the fire, Sam lit the oil lamp and picked up Huck Finn. His stomach let out a small growl he tried to ignore. He flipped open to a dog-eared page toward the end of the book. "I couldn't bear to think about it, and yet, somehow, I couldn't think about nothing else." Sam's ears perked. There was a creak in the distance, then a crackle. Sam turned his head to hear better. An avalanche of sound barreled toward him, cacophonous crashing, and a thunder erupted so loud that Sam felt it come through the ground. Then all went silent. Before Sam's mind had time to discern the source of the sound, the first blade of moonlight cut through the long, narrow window, a silvery beam stretching from the heavens directly to Sam. His face flushed with a heat that seeped into his veins and spread through his entire body, then flooded into his scar. In seconds, it felt like it was on fire. He dug and scraped his fingernails into it, triggering a painful relief for a moment before his arm changed under his scratching. The scar was expanding. No, not the scar. There was a dark, thick fur burning up his arm and onto his shoulder. Sam jerked his arm away. He could feel the roots of hair searing, expanding, and pushing out from each follicle of his skin, boiling up his arm, shoulder, and down over his back. Sam's vision went double as his skull shifted and grew. He choked as each vertebrae in his neck relocated. He ground his teeth as his jaw extended and the shape of his skull elongated. He was being scorched from the inside, as if the sun had set directly into his veins. His organs roiled and pressed at his ribcage, forcing it to widen. Every bone in his arms and legs burned as they stretched and pulled his ligaments from their roots. His fingers shrank as his nails narrowed and sharpened. Falling to his hands and knees, Sam released a guttural groan that grew into a powerful howl. The last of the hair blazed its way across his chest and down his legs, completing the transformation. Sam lifted his eyes to see the enormous full moon filling the window. It was undeniable. It was powerful. It made him boil from the inside with rage that was impossible to quench. His nose flooded with the pungent scents of pine, smoke, horse, manure, earth. Through the thickness, subtle threads prodded at his brain. One smell pulled at him, driving a hunger into his core. His mouth watered. Deer. He turned his head, calibrating exactly where the scent was coming from. He moved his ears, now ringing with the tiniest of sounds. There. Narrow, careful footsteps pushed into the snow somewhere in the distance, sounds that matched the smell, the steps of a doe. He looked at the door of the cabin. He wanted out. Now. He charged the door. The entire cabin shuddered as his new strength boomed into the night, but the door didn't budge. He let out a growl of frustration, then backed up and slammed the door again. The timbers blocking the door held firm. With each repeated effort, he only left claw marks in the dirt of the floor. Dirt. He reached down to the base of the wall and pulled the earth. New muscles flexed as he cut deep into it with his claws. The smells of soil filled his head. Worms, grubs, fermented vegetation, underground fungus, each had their own scent as they were pulled into a pile behind him. It wasn't long before he was reaching far under the wall of the cabin and breaking through to the surface outside. He drove himself into the hole, wedging his shoulders against the sides of the tunnel. He tried to push forward with all his might, but the wall of the cabin above didn't budge. He was stuck. His scar surged heat and urged him to push. A voice came from deep within. "Let me free," he growled through gritted teeth. With a savage burst, he pushed up with his newfound ferocity. The entire side of the cabin rose on his back. He shrugged his shoulders and drove forward. Boom! The cabin crashed back to the ground behind him. He stood free in the open air. The light of the moon glistened blue off his black coat of fur. He felt strong. He felt powerful. He felt alive. The pelt crawled out from the hole and flung itself up onto Sam's back. His entire brain filled with the smell of his prey, and the hunger took over. There was no doubt which way to go. North. Sam's legs and arms worked in unison in his new form as he barreled ahead on all fours. Pull, push, pull, push. He felt every fiber of his muscles as they stretched and pulled, propelling him powerfully onward. The smell of the deer grew stronger as the forest blazed past. He felt the wind on every hair that had risen out of his body. He felt at home. Sam was a dark shadow rushing through the moonlit forest. The chase was on. A mile away, the unsuspecting doe poked its nose into the fallen snow, looking for a bit of undergrowth. Sam eased his pace as he got closer, and the scent dug deeper into his head. His ears picked up the crunch of a single leaf, and he froze. Sam's new animal instincts were taking over. He turned his head and inhaled slowly. It was near. Through the shadows between the trees, his keen eyes caught just the glimpse of movement. Sam stopped. There it was again, the flitting of a short, white tail. The deer. A doe. Without making a sound, Sam dropped his head low and pushed his paw gently into the snow. Each precise step brought him closer and closer. He crouched, ready to pounce. The deer stepped into a shaft of moonlight in front of him. Sam vaulted out of the shadows and into the air, but the deer's reflexes were too sharp. Sam landed in the snow where the deer should have been. As the doe leapt ahead, Sam's instincts drove him into the chase. He bounded through the snow, up onto tree trunks and off rocks, leaving claw marks wherever he touched. He launched himself off a boulder directly at the deer, but again it was too quick, and his teeth only grazed its hind quarters, leaving a shallow gash. Sam tumbled head over tail into a snowdrift. Sam shook off his fall and renewed his chase, swinging wide to get ahead of the deer. Several seconds later, the deer stopped and looked back, its ears perking up and twitching from side to side, searching for any sound. Sam slowed his approach and stayed in the shadows, frozen. He picked up a new scent in the air. Fear. It was invigorating. Sam heard a faint pounding getting faster and faster. He smiled when he realized it was the racing of the doe's heartbeat. The deer stepped forward, turning its head repeatedly to scan the moonlit forest. Sam timed his movement with the deer, silently bolting from one shadow to the next, staying hidden as he tightened the distance between them. In his mind's eye, Sam replayed the deer leaping away. This time, he would anticipate the deer's darting and pounce ahead. He calculated the terrain, then adjusted his line of approach. He once again crouched and waited for the doe to step into the perfect place for a hidden attack. Patience. The doe's ears flicked as it took one step, then another. It cautiously poked its head between two tall birch trees, and Sam launched himself in the air with his mouth wide and teeth bared. The deer, spooked, but with nowhere to go, jumped straight towards him. In an instant, jaws were clenched around its neck. Sam's teeth sunk deep into the thick hide. He tasted the hot, metallic blood as it filled his mouth and eased down his throat. The deer thrashed and struggled, but it only helped Sam's teeth cut deeper, until they crunched into bone. Sam shook the deer and could feel the neck dislocate and snap. The fight was over. He had made the kill. He felt powerful, proud. Sam felt a shift in the structure of the neck between his teeth. The bones of the spine were moving, fitting into his mouth differently. Sam swallowed the blood that ran down his throat. 1 gulp. 2. The pressure of its pulse weakened with each fading heartbeat. The doe twitched one final time as Sam laid the limp body on the snow before him. Its smell was changing. The scent was less wild. There was an earthen quality to it, a deepening that was somehow familiar. Sam released his jaws and stepped back. He looked up, left, right, then down at his kill. Something wasn't right. It stirred in a peculiar way. The deer's beige-brown hair was blanching and sloughing off. The blood-stained hair of the neck fell away to reveal pale skin. Where the neck was bitten was shedding hair, while the top of the deer's head was growing it. Something else was being revealed from underneath as all the brown body hair fell away. Sam snorted and sneezed. He shook his head aggressively to try to clear his brain. The small part of him that was still human was trying to make sense of what his eyes saw. Looking down again, it was undeniable. On the red-stained snow in front of him, sparsely covered in the remaining hair of a deer, lay an old woman. Her gray hair spread around her head, her lifeless eyes staring into nothing. Above her shoulder, on her neck, a gaping wound. She didn't move. No pulse. Letha. The world slowed. Sam's own breath filled his ears. One breath, another, a third. He exhaled a mist that hung in the air like a still, small cloud. One by one, small sparks of light crackled as they emerged from the trees nearby. They gently floated through the hanging mist of Sam's breath, pulling tiny translucent trails as they lingered and swirled above Letha's body. Each in turn delicately fell onto her pale skin before gradually fading out. Letha lay in front of him without the light in her eyes, without the smile on her face. In the valley of his heart, all Sam's sorrow and regret emerged. Swelling from deep within, it finally found its escape with a prolonged howl of lament. The ball from his throat drowned out his human thoughts, and his beastly instincts washed back over him. His hunger returned. His feeling of power returned. It was intoxicating to stalk his prey, to kill. His stomach growled as he anticipated his hunger finally being satisfied. He brought his tongue out and dipped his head to taste the blood again, but his ears twitched. Was it a voice? A cry? A new scent drove into his animal brain. He searched the forest. His senses pulled at his nose and ears, luring him away from his own prey. He needed to kill again. The sound. There it was again. And the smell. There. His legs sprung, and the world around him was a blur of speed. Behind him, the naked trees of winter bowed towards Letha's body. With each stride forward, Sam's new wolf form was leaving human thoughts behind. The deeper he went into the woods, the deeper he went into his new animal self. The small string of Sam's own consciousness that was connected to the beast was wearing thinner and thinner. The passing timbers of the forest opened to a clearing in the snow. Towering blocks of stone stood tall in a wide circle, while one lay in the middle on its side, an altar of rock. A shaft of blue-gray light from the moon cut through the trees and directly onto the altar. There was movement, squirming. On a bed of pine boughs lay the tiniest spotted fawn. It seemed an offering to the wolf, to Sam. It was another life he could easily take, a new taste to experience. His belly was still empty. Without eating his first kill, his hunger was still unsatisfied. The blood had yet to dry on Sam's snout, and there would soon be more. The fawn bleated in search of its mother, his ears filled with sound. The spots on the fawn shifted as it inhaled, a new breath filling its tiny lungs. It bawled even louder. It almost sounded human. He stalked at the edge of the stone circle, creeping closer and closer to the fawn. Different than the doe in the woods, it was helpless. It didn't move. It must have sensed Sam. The wolf was close. Its own instincts told it to stay alive. It must stay still. Sam barely maintained a thread of control over the wolf within. He stopped and stared at the fawn in front of him. He shook his head and snorted loudly, trying to get the scent out of his nose. The fawn shimmered in the moonlight. For a moment, it seemed like it wasn't there at all. This little morsel had no protection. It would be effortless to kill, so young that it didn't even run. It had cried out for its dead mother, even with death standing before it. It was defenseless. Sam lunged and felt a pang of disappointment when it didn't move. What fun is it to hunt something that won't be chased? Sam's tenuous thread that connected him to himself was beginning to give way. He could barely hold on. Sam circled the altar again, inching closer to the fawn. The smell. It seeped into his brain as Sam licked his snout. The fawn let out a small whimper. The moonlight glinted off the welled-up tears in its eyes. All Sam could feel was a wanting, a yearning to taste those very tears, to taste its fear. He stepped closer, looming over his tiny prey. Its mother was dead. So was his. The fawn was alone. So was he. Rage filled him. He would tear the fawn apart, like his family was torn from him. He wanted to swallow the loneliness and bury it deep inside this mighty beast he had become. He would never be hurt again. He could feel the fawn's breath. He was close enough to lick it. Taste. His mouth watered and his stomach growled at the hint of the tender meal. The fawn didn't move. A fleeting thought from the recesses of Sam's mind rose. It thinks I'm its mother. Sam's tongue wrapped around the fawn's tiny head and touched its tear-filled eye. Sam's entire being shuddered at the salty taste. He pedaled back as the tears turned so cold they burned his throat as he swallowed. It mixed with the blood from the doe like a great fermented poison that curdled inside of him. His stomach churned into knots, freezing him from the inside out. His beastly form weakened. He curled over, breathless from the pain. Every gasp for air only pushed another wave of pain deeper, tighter, darker. His heartbeat slowed. This must be what it's like to die. His body twitched. At least I'll get to be with my family. He stopped fighting. A voice from an unknown space within instructed him. Breathe. It was the voice of Arthur. Sam opened. Air rushed into his lungs. From his brow, a streak of white erupted from the roots of his dark fur. Burning cold, it blazed from above his eye, over and down the back of his head, his shoulder, and pushed into his scar. His heartbeat returned, pushing a warmth through his entire body. His senses were suddenly overwhelmed, like they were being used for the first time. He heard every movement in the night, from beetles clicking their wings to the breath of mice digging in the snow. He felt the earth's slow hum beneath his feet, grounding him into it. Colors he had never seen before danced against the darkness of the night. Trees pulsed with a dark hue. Auras stretched from every branch. Small spots glowed through the snow and scurried under the surface. Sam raised his head, his eyes filled with sapphire moonlight. He felt his ankles shorten and his legs lengthen until he was standing upright. His claws retracted as his paws stretched into palms and clawed fingers. The fur on his body was still thick, and his muscles ached to move, but he felt more human and less like the wolf that he had been struggling to control. He finally had a hold of himself again. Sam finally exhaled. Amber fireflies rose out of the ground through the snow and swirled to the altar. their light turning blue as they crossed into the moonlight and engulfed the fawn. Sam blinked as he looked into the center of the glow at the baby. Tears streaked its cheeks as its cry pierced the night. Sam scooped up the baby, cradling it against him. The pelt swung around him and wrapped around the baby, protecting it from the cold. "Keep her warm." The baby calmed as Sam pulled her close. He brought his head up and perked his ears, searching the forest for any threat. More fireflies seeped up from under the snow and circled around them. The baby fluttered her eyelids open and fixed her gaze on Sam. At first, Sam thought her eyes were the deep color of the ground at first thaw, but he watched as one iris began to change before him from the outside in, turning from brown to an icy blue. Sam felt a warmth return to his center. He knew from deep within that this small, helpless creature was somehow his. Out of the darkness of the northern sky, the ribbons of the aurora burst forth. Sam and the baby sat at the center of the henge, bathed in a silvery moonbeam, surrounded by the dancing lights. Behind Sam, next to the altar, stood Letha's staff. Fireflies rose and glowed blue as they circled the top. He remembered the lullaby his mother used to sing to him and his siblings. It rose up and out of him without a thought, and Sam found himself singing to the baby. His voice was pure, and his pitch was true. The last leaf on Letha's staff fell. In its place, a new bud sprung forth, the edge thrumming with light. As the sun broke through the dawn, the Jacks and witches made their way toward the henge. They anticipated two possibilities from the night before. Either there would be nothing but bloodstains, and the Jacks would have to hunt Sam down, or, on the ground, Sam sat with his head bowed over the baby. His pelt was curled around them both as he softly sang a lullaby. Alma exhaled with relief as Sam looked up. "Morning, young Sam," said Constance gently. "Well, look at that," marveled Alma. "There it is," remarked John. They were all looking at Sam's hair. In his human form, the blaze of white remained. "What is it?" Sam asked, trying to look up at his own head. "You have a wonderful streak. It looks dashing," Alma answered. Sam reached up and touched his hair, but it didn't feel any different. "I'm glad to see you made it through the night," Constance said gently, as did she. Her eye, it changed color. There was so much going through Sam's mind. "She saved you." Alma completed the sentence for him. Sam knew what Alma said was true. This baby had somehow tamed the ferocious beast he had become, though he couldn't fathom how. "She's your witch," explained Alma. "She's your tether. She is the one person that will keep you connected to yourself and will help you control your power as it grows, as you both grow." My tether, Sam thought. He looked down at the baby and searched his mind through the murky memories of the previous night. "Letha," he said under his breath. "Letha?" Alma asked, scanning those that had gathered. Letha's staff stood next to the stone altar. "Where is she?" Sam had so many strange, realistic dreams of the past weeks. It must have been a bad dream. "Letha?" John called out. "Letha?" Others called, but there was no answer. "She should be here," Alma said. "It's the most important part." Maybe it wasn't a dream. A dread filled Sam. He wanted to flee, but he was frozen in place. Stu came running from the woods, tears streaming down his face. "Help! It's Grandma Letty! I found her! Oh, Grandma Letty, she's dead!" All heads turned. The voice was Sam's. His mind wasn't swimming anymore. It was drowning. "I think I killed her. I couldn't stop myself. I was the wolf, she was a deer, then she wasn't the moon. I couldn't stop. It happened before I found her." "You killed Grandma Letty?" Stu cried. "I'm so sorry. John stepped forward. "Every witch has her way." He placed a hand on Stu's shoulder. "We knew she needed to join Arthur." "But she didn't tell me," Stu replied. Constance drew Stu close. Would knowing have made it easier, or would you have tried to stop her? Or stop Sam? It was as she wished, or it wouldn't be. But I'm her favorite. Stu was quiet. Kofi stepped forward. I imagine you will always be. Sam hoped that somehow, some way, Stu would forgive him. Having her gone won't be easy, said Constance. I'm going to miss her. Stu looked at the sky. I'm going to miss you, Grandma Letty. We all will, said John. Truth. Alma reached for the baby. She's not gone, but passed on, like Arthur passed on to you, Sam. I thought Letha would be my witch, Sam stated. Wait! Stu's eyes darted as he tried putting the pieces together. Letha was Arthur's witch. Then Arthur passed on to you. Letha had to pass on to someone too, so she passed on, or into the baby. She was doing that the same night you got to Ford, so it ain't just Grandma Letty that isn't, corrected Constance. It isn't Grandma Letty that's your witch. It's the baby. My witch also means she's my tether. Sam surprised himself with how confidently he spoke. Alma turned to John. I think he's proven. I think he is too. John addressed Sam directly. You've made it through your proving. Still got quite a bit to learn, though. Sam allowed a feeling of relief to find him. I made it. You both did, replied Alma. You are a living part of both Arthur and Letha's sacrifice, a crucial part, and you should always hold your tether tightly when your change comes. A turbulent mix of sadness, remorse, and hope filled Sam. Only a few hours ago he had taken a life, that of their lovely Letha, but now he had a place, a people, and a purpose. He felt that it was his duty to protect and nurture this baby, this small one that tethered him to himself and to his deeper meaning. You have strong blood in you. John paused for emphasis. Arthur was a formidable, noble man. His blood-born power will add to your own birth-born strength as you grow. Sam's thoughts went to his father and his family. It had barely been a month since fire had taken them, and now here he was, surrounded by new, destined kin. Sam knew he would never be alone, but there was still much to learn, starting with the little one he held. What's her name? Sam asked. We've given her the name Caddy, Yara answered. But you should give her a tethered name. Sam hadn't ever named anyone or anything before. Looking down at the baby, he felt nervous. His mind searched for something special to call her, the one who had brought him back from the beast. He wanted a name that tied them together, like brother and sister. He remembered this special full moon and the fireflies of his old home. I can name her anything? Yara nodded. Sam closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Blue. As though recognizing her new name, Blue squirmed and let out a small coo. Alma and Yara met eyes as the name swirled in the air between them. Ah, Blue, Alma smiled. That's a fine name for a little one, remarked Yara. Yes, it is, added Constance. Sam handed the baby back to her parents. I think she might be hungry. Well now, come here, little Blue. Yara smiled as he took the baby from Sam. Sam stood and his pelt wrapped around his waist. Even with the snow all around, he didn't feel cold. Instead, he felt John's hand on his back. Well done.